Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts and other stuff they're involved in. My guest today is an undefeated boxer and kickboxer and the first athlete, male or female, to hold 2 world championships in martial arts and boxing at the same time. A longtime advocate of self-defense for women, she has expertise beyond the ring as a verified NRA weapons instructor, a Kali FMA Master, and one of the first and few women to graduate the ESI Executive Protection Program. She also became a world champion in Filipino Stick Fighting, is a Black Belt Hall of Fame inductee, has appeared in the films Full Impact and Fire in the Night, was awarded Black Belt Magazine and Inside Kung Fu Magazine's Woman of the Year in 1989, and is one of the most sought-after martial arts and tactical trainers in the world, teaching self-defense programs with stick, blade, gun, empty hand to civilian, law enforcement, and even military personnel around the world. She's also an adjunct professor at Oxnard College with 2 master's degrees. Please welcome my guest today, Graciela Casillas. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, thank you. I know how busy you can be, and I truly appreciate your time.
Thank you.
What I like to do with all my guests, I know you've listened to a couple of my interviews, but I want to go back to the very beginning. I want to know where that first spark came from, that first interest in martial arts that started off your journey.
Well, my story doesn't really change. It all started when I was 16 years old in a Catholic church. I was part of a youth group, and because I came from a very strict family from Mexico, the young ladies in our family didn't get to go out and do a whole lot, but we did get to go to church. And as a participant in a youth group, I got to go out a couple nights a week and hang out with other young people, so I was very interested in doing that. And it was at that time that Father Alex, who was the head of the church at that time, asked if we would be interested in taking a self-defense class, and that he knew someone that he would bring into the church to offer those classes. And since I thought, okay, I have another opportunity to get out of the house and hang out with other young people, I said, absolutely, I'm interested. But the little caveat was that 3 of my brothers had to go with me, my younger brothers. So that was my first intro to the martial arts, to a Taekwondo class.
Okay. And how long did you do that?
Well, my instructor had come from a local Huarangdo school, which I didn't know that at the time. And I'll say this because of the politics and the martial arts, he could not really say he was teaching Huarangdo, so it was a Taekwondo. Okay. So my instructor, Juan Gonzalez, and he never really said this to us, but as years went by, I realized that I was learning very similar techniques when I eventually ended up at the Huarangdo school. But it went on for a year, and we were in the church in a room on the side of the actual church where we would practice and we would train. And the other priests that were always there didn't really like us there because they'd walk in and we would be chanting and going and it wasn't aligned with Catholicism. So I felt like they came up with the excuse to get us out of there and said we were leaving footprints on the walls, and it just was not okay. So we got kicked out of the church basically. But by then I was kind of hooked. That was after a few months. And so we ended up in this park called Rose Park in Oxnard, where years later I realized that we were very, ignorance is bliss, because we had no idea where we were training, but it was not a good side of town.
Okay.
And so we continued there till little by little everybody kind of dropped out because the training was very hard. But I enjoyed it. I liked it. Our instructor was pretty intense. He made us wear army fatigues, not karate gis. We also didn't have a lot of money, so I guess they came cheaper. And we just, until the very end, which was a year later, I was just 2 or 3 of us were left standing, including all my brothers that quickly dropped out. They didn't like doing knuckle push-ups on concrete. And so that ended about a year into my training.
Now, was that pretty much strictly self-defense? You do anything with competition at all back then, or?
Oh, no,
Okay.
we did no competition whatsoever. It was all just, pretty intense training, a lot of sparring. We did a lot of sparring, but you're talking about 1974. We didn't have safety equipment. We didn't have safety kicks. We didn't, he would invite some of the local Kempo black belts would come over and basically beat the crap out of us. They would spar with us
Wow.
and beat us up because we were young and didn't have the experience, but we also didn't understand the difference. We didn't know any better because that's all we knew. So that went on for a while until, as I said, the class just kind of fell apart. And I was left at that point in time. I thought, wow, I really love this. This was the first physical activity I had ever been involved in. Because, as I said, my family, I grew up with 11 brothers and sisters, and there was only three women. So we didn't get out a lot. My parents, as I said, were very strict, but this was something they allowed me to do. And so it was more than just, getting out of the house and having the freedom of, not being stuck at home. My mom used to always say, you have plenty of brothers and sisters to play with. You don't need other friends. And so we interacted with each other. But being able to train for me was just amazing. It was something that I thought, wow, I can be good at this. And I just initially, from day one, I just felt a connection to the martial arts. Like I belonged there. This was something I was going to do. And I never had a second thought. So when that class ended, I immediately, looked into who was around. And, I'm not really sure why I didn't end up because there was only really two schools at the time. It was the Hwarang Do school under Jubong Lee. And then there was the Flores Brothers Kempo Karate. And I guess I didn't really know about them. So I just, transitioned to the local Hwarang Do school, which was very familiar to me because I realized the curriculum was a lot similar to what I had already been learning.
Right.
So I ended up enrolling in the school there.
And so you said it was very similar. What are some of the things that were maybe different that stood out when you first started there?
Well, what was the combination kicks were beautiful. In the Taekwondo class, we did do a lot of kick and punches, and we were learning our basic forms, and we were doing locks, which later on I learned Taekwondo didn't really do locks. So that's why I realized that some of what we were learning actually came from Hwarang Do because my Taekwondo instructor came from the Hwarang Do school. So obviously what he was teaching us was similar to what he had been teaching at the Hwarang Do school. And what impressed me the most was I just loved the kicks. They were doing, instead of just one kick, it was triple side kick, antari, pakatari, torantari. They were all it's interesting that I still retain the Korean terminology after 50 years.
Yeah.
Certain things just stick with you, but the kicking combinations I loved, and the locks. There was a lot of throws and locks in Hwarang Do that were they're very artistic, but also very effective.
Okay, and how long did you train at that school?
I was there for several years until I was ready to test for my black belt, and then I transferred to UCSB. By then, I was a college student. I'd already gone to the community college for 2 years, and I was there from till 79. And went to UCSB. But what had happened was Jubang Lee also did not allow us or permit us to compete. Oh. And I was now a red belt, which was in that system equivalent to a brown belt. And I already knew that my purpose was to teach. I loved teaching. I loved working with, other people at that time and teaching women. And I felt like, how can I teach something if I've never, one, been hit, two, I don't know if this stuff works for me. I could see for the men, always being the minority, I felt like, well, they're big and strong. They can make anything work, but can I make this work? So when I heard that there was this competition called Full Contact to the Knockout, and there was some guys down the street from the Hwarang Do school training for this, and they got to go in a ring and they got to fight to the knockout. Wow. I got really excited. So I managed to go over to the Kempo school. Then I found out about the Kempo school and met Refugio Flores, who was a young fighter and fighting full contact karate. He was, I think, WKA state champion at the time, and asked if I could train with them. And that, went on for a while because at first they were kind of like, are you serious? And eventually they accepted me and I started training with them and I started fighting. I started doing these full contact karate fights. But I was terrified that Jubang Lee would find out what I was doing. And eventually he did find out because I started getting the local write-ups, and people start finding out what you're doing. And you start making an impact. But I was pleasantly surprised that he just said, you make a good name for the school. And, it was okay. But now being a university student at UCSB, I was like hungry, wanting to fight more. And so once I graduated from UCSB, I ended up moving to Los Angeles and seeking out other trainers and left the Huarangdo school.
So your first ever competition was full contact?
Yes. I never competed in a tournament.
That's crazy. Wow.
And not so much because if you don't know the difference,
true.
That's the way I started sparring, even as a total beginner, my first year of martial arts training, I didn't know the difference.
So you said you ended up in Los Angeles. What school did you end up finding down there?
No school. I just was kind of a loner. I sought out and ended up meeting someone named Steve Fisher and Howard Jackson. I don't know if you know who they are, but incredible martial artists and incredible fighters. And I must have been pretty young because Steve Fisher would drive to Oxnard to pick me up and take me to Inglewood, to Lenox, where school was, to train, and then take me back home. So that was my first introduction to professional fighters, working with Howard Jackson and with Steve. And there was going to be a fight. I'd already been fighting, but I was going to have an opportunity to fight overseas. So I convinced my mother to let me go to Los Angeles and stay there and train. And by now I had my bachelor's degree and I was contemplating, what to do next. And the only way she eventually allowed me to go there is I moved in with another brother who lived in Van Nuys. But initially I went and I had a trainer named Hap Holloway who started working with me also and helping me get fights.
And so what was the fight scene like back then, especially for women? Was it pretty hard in the 70s to find fights, or was it a little easier?
It was very difficult to find fights, for one, and very difficult to find a fight where you were treated with any respect. And because women just weren't fighting. There was Lily Rodriguez was out there, Marion Bermudez before her, I think, but you didn't really hear about women fighting. And so they tolerated us. And it was, as I said, it was real difficult. The reason I actually started, I was kickboxing first, but as a professional and a world champion, I became a boxing world champion before kickboxing because I just couldn't get the fights. And it wasn't until, WK, I believe I was the first female to become a world champion. There's others, like Lily was a state champion at the time, but not world champion. And, you just couldn't get the fights. You had to convince promoters that you were marketable, that people would be interested in watching you. And, even in the boxing world, it was a mess. It was, trainers always telling you, look, they don't want women on the card. They don't want it. They're going to do me a favor, so we'll pay you that $100 a round. And we didn't really make any money. And it was Lily Rodriguez was the fighter that I became aware of that was doing both. She was a really phenomenal kickboxer, but she was also boxing. She was a really good boxer. And that's when I thought, well, why can't I do both? I'm training in boxing because I want it to better my hands. So why can't I just keep my feet on the ground and if I can get a fight? And that's how I actually ended up going into boxing because I couldn't get enough fights.
So do you remember your very first boxing match?
Oh, absolutely. I have a documentary out right now on Amazon Prime. It's called The Lioness Within. And it has my first fight on there. And, it's really focused on my fight years. But my first fight was Friday the 13th, 1979, my first pro fight against Karen Bennett from Las Vegas. And the reason it just left such an indelible mark is because I could not get a fight anywhere. And I was told I was an inferior opponent. I was told that I didn't have the background. I didn't have the training. To this day, I keep a letter of a promoter saying, forget it. We don't want her. Basically, not in those words, but saying we don't want to end her career before it begins. And they didn't know I'd already fought. I'd been a kickboxer. So they literally had to doctor my record up because there was going to be this big show at the LA Sports Arena. It was going to be an all women's card. And the world champion at the time, who was going to just defend her title, well, her opponent hurt her hand or something happened, but the fight fell out. So they were panicking a couple of weeks before, trying to figure out what to do. And they said, well, there's this little Mexican over there training at Hoover Street Boxing Gym. Why don't we stick her in? It'll be a tune-up match for Karen Bennett. And I retired her that night.
Wow.
And ended up going, it's a 6-rounder, 6 rounds, 2-minute rounds. In California, they wouldn't allow women to fight 3-minute rounds or more than 6 rounds at the time. And I went in her place 2 weeks later, the 31st of July, and fought 10 3-minute rounds that went the distance in San Antonio, Texas.
Wow.
Against Ginger Kaufman out of Minneapolis. So that's how my boxing career started. I just retired her, ended up taking her title, and moved on from there.
That is cool.
I was just going to say what's ironic is that out of 31 combined professional fights I had, my first was at the Los Angeles Sports Arena. My last was at the Inglewood Forum. And in between, I had to fight everywhere else because California would not allow us, the rounds that we needed for a title defense.
Wow.
So I never fought in California in between.
That's crazy. And now they'd jump at the chance probably.
Oh, well, yeah, we were definitely, I want to say, ahead of our time, the fighters back then. And there were some really good female fighters, but we just did not get the recognition. We did not get the attention. We did not get treated, equitably. Promoters just, like I said earlier, just tolerated us. And, that was it.
Well, you guys definitely paved the way for the women of today. I mean, that's impressive.
I believe we did. And sometimes I wonder when I have conversations with like George Chun from Black Belt Magazine or something where we talk about the history of it. And I say, I wonder how many of these women even know that we exist or know that. I mean, some of the women that during my era were going on hunger strikes were doing, Lily and Lady Tiger, she went on a hunger strike trying to get, promoters to acknowledge us. And just a lot. There were no real weight divisions. When I fought in Hong Kong in 1980, I'm sure I gave up at least 15 pounds.
Wow.
Because if you complain, they just said, well, then don't fight. We don't need you. So you would say, okay, I'll fight. And, went to Hong Kong with Benny Urquidez and Don Wilson to do a demonstration. And we get there and we're challenged. And this is pre-UFC. And we have to wear these little bag gloves. And we were fighting all these Wing Chun, quote unquote, Wing Chun masters. And I think mostly it was a North American team. And none of us had our trainers with us. Well, Benny was his own trainer. So we ended up, I think it was the first round knockout. I just reverted back to boxing because it was a mess. Some of the guys would fall out there was no ring. It was just a platform and all these people and you didn't understand the language and they would just kind of throw you back in and, keep fighting. So interesting times.
Which did you prefer? I mean, if everything was the same, if you would have made good money doing either one, would you have preferred boxing or kickboxing?
I really can't answer that because they're hard to compare. Mm-hmm. Boxing to me was more lethal because of the range. So kickboxing, you had more options. You're dealing with 4 weapons. You can get flashier. You can get, even though I was never a flashy fighter, I was just for years I was a slugger, but I had a heart. I carried a heavy hand and I had 18 knockouts before I retired. So they're so different. I think, I don't want to say kickboxing was easier, but the chances of getting hurt because of the distance was less than going toe-to-toe with somebody trying to knock your head off. So
yeah, I suppose that makes a difference, I suppose. But
yeah, people don't think about that, but the range is important.
So out of your 31 pro fights, which one do you think was your toughest?
Oh, I know. I can tell you immediately. It was New York. It was against Darlene, Cookie Melendez, not Darlene, but Cookie Melendez. It's fun because we're friends on Facebook today, but she was just an incredible warrior, tough fighter. And again, even there was so many politics and just, it's always hard for women. I was a WK world champion. She was used to fighting PKA which, the difference back then, there was mainly those 2 organizations. World Karate Association, you could kick below the waist, and we were known more for our thigh kicks, the Thai type kicks. Professional Karate Association, which was PKA, was known. All the kicks had to be above the waist. So if I fought PKA, I just knew I had to keep my kicks high. If I was fighting a WKA sanctioned fight, I knew that I could kick to the leg. So when I got to New York to fight her, there was a mess because they changed the rules on me, and I was defending my title. So it's always political, and it was always. But I felt like they always wanted me to lose, but they never accomplished that. Even though they changed the rules on me and the whole fight stopped, and because, I was a world champion, but they wanted me to go based on PK. This was a WKA title defense, but they said, no, you can't kick below the waist, but those are the rules. So anyway, but we got through the fight. I won the fight, but she was extremely, tough. And, I always say I threw everything at her but the kitchen sink, and she just stood there and kept fighting. So she was my toughest opponent.
Well, that's cool that you're friends today, though.
Today we high five each other on Facebook. I like her stuff. I comment. I actually, years after that, we would be in the same venue teaching at these martial arts camps and stuff like that. But it's a sport.
Yeah.
It's a sport, and you're in the ring, and you're there to accomplish one thing, and you get out of the ring. I mean, I remember in Hong Kong buying my opponent, offering her a Coke afterwards, and her giving me her business card and saying, if you're ever in Hong Kong, I haven't been back since, but I've been to China, but not to Hong Kong. But that's part of the camaraderie of it's the sport. People, not like you see in some of the UFC today, where guys. Some of them don't really abide by the virtues of the martial arts is supposed to teach us.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you see that sometimes. I used to judge MMA fights, and I would see that a lot. Mm-hmm. The bad stuff that wasn't just a show. I mean, some of it's a show. You see some of it, the big talking and stuff, but also I've seen a lot of stuff happen outside of the cage and outside of the ring. That's like, come on, guys, grow up.
Yes.
So then after you retired, is that when you really started doubling down on the women's self-defense stuff? Or were you doing that at the same time as when you were fighting professionally too?
I was doing a little bit of it.
Okay.
But as a professional fighter, as I mentioned earlier, I was pretty much of a slugger. So even though I would, if I didn't knock out my opponents, you would wonder who won the fight because of the beating that I took. So my friend at the time, Paul Maslock, who was editor of Inside Kung Fu, and very supportive of me, I said, you know what, you got to quit taking those punches. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? I'm just like lead foot. And I would just kind of go in there. And I mean, I was strong for my size. I was, bantamweight 118, but I had an unusually, I would say, thick neck and wide shoulders. So I packed a good punch. Mm-hmm. And, but I took punches, and, it's like you take three to give one, and fortunately yours is a little bit stronger. But he says, I've got the perfect teacher for you that's going to help you with that so that you quit getting hit as much. And in 1980, he took me over to Culver City, introduced me to Dan Inosanto.
Ah, nice.
And that's where my journey started there. And I started training there because I really had no footwork, and I didn't really understand angles, and there was so much I didn't know. And even though at the time, if you know anything, I'm sure you do, about Guru Dan Inosanto, he back then would go through phases. So like he would go through a JKD phase, or he would go through a Silat phase, or he would go through Savat phase. We went through whatever his interest was. That's what we would train in the Junfang kickboxing. And I learned, that really helped me. But that's when I became fascinated with, because I'd never really seen the Kali. And, I watched them work with the weapons, with the sticks. And I started getting more involved with that. But the reason I brought that up, it's because someone that I met there, Cliff Stewart, who became a great training partner for me, a dear friend, always encouraged me as I was going through over the years there. I was there from like 80 to 88. He always encouraged me to look at more street-oriented tactics. And because I would be excited that I could get a floreta down, or I was flashing this and that, and he would just kind of go, that's not where it's at. You need to, this is what you should be focusing on. And so he really encouraged me. And in 1986, I retired from the ring. I was still fighting while I was at Danny's school. Mm-hmm. And I retired in 86, came back, I think, in 88 for a special fight. And at that point, I wanted to teach women's self-defense, but it was during a time period where a lot of the organizations were basically advocating women's self-defense, and not advocating women's self-defense, but dealing with women from the position of, if you were assaulted, there's nothing you could have done. It's unfortunate, but you'll get over it. We'll get you some therapy. And my message was just the opposite, saying, this is BS. You can learn to fight back. You can fight back, and you should fight back. So my message wasn't very popular, and I couldn't give my skills away for free. I was like, what is this? I'm a 2-time world champion at the time, and nobody, they don't want it. And so I got sort of discouraged and just started really focusing on defensive tactics and, training with the men, and because there really weren't women to train with, but spending a lot of time with Cliff, who introduced me to people like Masad Ayub. And everywhere he went, because he worked in the world of executive protection, I would go along with him.
Wow.
And I started going in that direction, getting a lot of training and becoming part of the American Society of Law Enforcement Trainers. And there was just very few civilians at the time that were invited to participate. Mm-hmm. Cliff was one, I was one, the other was Richard Bustillo, but most of them were law enforcement. But for years we would go and teach there. And I just became more involved in the defensive tactics, for lack of a better term, as opposed to the traditional martial art.
Okay. And that's something you're still involved in. So that's been part of your life for quite a while now.
Even more, I love martial arts, and I have my own system that I teach called Shen, the Way of the Warrior Spirit. And, I've had a school off and on for years, but I always, like a broken record for those young people who don't know what a record is anymore, but you have to think about what analogies you use today, because people can't relate. Like when you ask someone, if you were in a phone booth, would you rather have a staff or a stick? They go, what's a phone booth?
Yep.
Right? Or I say rewind. Oh, what's rewind?
I've had a few guests mention a phone book too, and I've had to hold on, we might have to explain that.
Yeah, what's a phone book when you want to practice your 1-inch punch?
Yep.
So I just continued training, developing myself in the field of defensive tactics. I completely forgot what I was going to say. I was thinking of the phone booth, but it's just younger. People don't relate to it, and you have to modify it. In 1986, I started writing for seems like 100 years ago. A Karate Illustrated, Karate Kung Fu Illustrated, then became Karate Illustrated. Then I went on to write for Black Belt for many years, then Inside Kung Fu. So even in the 80s, I was writing articles on why I believe firearms training should be part of it's a martial way. It's a martial art, martial way. And it's the modern weapon. So that I believe that should be part of everyone's training, whether you choose to carry it or not. It's just like edge weapons. A majority of people that train with edge weapons may not want to carry an edge weapon, may never see themselves thrusting a knife through somebody's body in self-defense. Nevertheless, if they want to defend themselves, having that skill set will help them tremendously. And that's something Guru Dan used to always tell us, even if you're not going to carry a knife, you should know how to use one, any weapon. If you're familiar with it, then the fear of the unknown is gone. If you're ever assaulted, somebody with a stick or a knife, and also a firearm. And that's why I've always believed in that. And I teach that. And I think that edge weapons, especially for small people, not just women, but small individuals, become great equalizers. And it's more readily accessible than an impact weapon. How many of us carry a stick around?
Right.
We don't.
Yeah.
But you can always, a folder or a pocket knife, pretty common. And so I still, even though back then I wrote about it and I practiced for myself, I didn't teach it until the last probably decade that I've gotten more into teaching firearms.
Did I read somewhere that you actually designed your own knife? You designed a knife, the Lady Hawk knife?
Yes, I did. And back in the early 90s, I designed a blade, and it was White Wolf knives, and then they sold the patent to somebody else. So yes, I did. I was one of 4. It was Masad Ayub, myself. I'm trying to think of from Washington, Janet. Those 4 of us we were like the first 4, you want to say, martial artists that were approached to design a blade that was designed for self-defense versus fishing or, rope cutting. It was called Masters of Defense.
Okay.
So yes, I did.
Can that still be purchased? Is that still, anyone still?
Yeah, it's still out there. It's expensive.
Yeah.
I only own a couple myself because they're up there in price.
Oh yeah, I just found one online. Yeah, they're like $250 to $300.
Yeah.
Oh, but I've seen knives more expensive than that though. Also.
That is true. My favorite knives now are all designed by Bram Frank out of Florida.
Okay.
And I've talked to him over the years of designing a different blade because that was in 1992 when I designed that blade. I wanted something small because my focus was small hands, not just women, and weapon retention.
Okay.
And I thought if the knife is, people always have this misconception that you need a big knife to defend yourself. Well, little do they know that a small knife can do even more damage. And it's very difficult to disarm someone with a smaller blade than it is with a bigger blade. So that's why I designed the knife small. Like, so a bigger guy wouldn't like it, wouldn't feel good in his hand. But this one, the way I designed it, it's if someone tries to take a knife away from a female, for example, they're going to meet flesh with blade. They're not going to be able to grab anything else. So that was the purpose. But today I would probably design something a little different.
Okay.
And Bram Frank has a lot of really cool knives that I like. And I can tell him, okay, where's mine? Let's work on mine. So.
Well, if you do, you have to let me know because I will definitely put a link out for it. That'd be cool to see. And I also you wrote a book. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have a book called It's called The Lioness Within. It's a personal guide to self-defense, but it's not one of these. There's no pictures in it. It's the type of book that I felt someone could. I always visualize, young ladies sitting on a plane, bored, and it's an easy enough book to read. And a lot of it is on the psychological and the mental aspects of defending yourself. There's some of my stories in there and experiences that I've had and some of my students. And so I've had a good response where, young ladies, it's written for women. But I always say it's a book written for women that every man should read, because if you have women in your life, you should kind of know what women go through and what obstacles and challenges that we have. So, yes, you can get it through Amazon.
Cool. I will definitely put a link for that out there also. It's there. I'm just looking at it right now. I'll have to order a copy. Although I tell many of my guests, I have a stack next to me right now as I turn my head. I have about 15 to 20 books that I bought from guests I've interviewed in the last 2 years. And I've probably only
have time to read them.
I don't, just because of the podcast. I literally used to read a book a week. I used to read about 50 books a year before I started doing the podcast. And now I'm lucky if I read one. I just don't have the time, but I still keep buying them. I still keep buying them to support them. And hopefully at some point, if I ever stop doing this, I'll read a lot of books.
You probably won't, but we know that because I'm the same way. I have hundreds of books, and then I keep buying more, and then I will put myself on timeout, and I say, you will not buy another book until you read the books you have, and then I go, but it's such an interesting book. Or you meet someone and it's their book, and so you want to buy it to see.
Exactly.
But that's why we have audiobooks today. Mine's on Kindle, but not audio. But
okay.
Now I feel guilty because I'm always listening to audiobooks, and I look around where I'm sitting right now and I have like bookshelves with so many different books.
That's cool. See, and I'm not a fan of audiobooks. I've never been into them, but I might have to try. We'll see.
Well, when you're on the road a lot, and if you're lucky, the actual author is reading it, then it feels more. It's like it's read by the author. Yeah,
that I could do, because like I know I read Matthew McConaughey's new book like 2 years ago. And I found out after I read it that he actually recorded the audiobook. I'm like, oh, I wish I would have listened to that now. Just because that'd be so much cooler.
One of those 15 books you have. Matthew's book is one of the ones sitting on my shelf there that I'm going to read one.
It's a great book. I actually probably got through that book in about 3 days. That's how good it was.
I will definitely have to read.
It's one of the favorite books I bought in the last 5 years. It was really, he's an amazing storyteller. It was a really good book. So I highly, I've recommended it to a lot of people.
Well, I'll have to just read it. I have it.
Cool. Now you talked about you started teaching, years and years ago. So think back to when you first started teaching to now. You still do it. You still teach, tactical classes and stuff. Over all those years, how do you think your teaching style has changed?
My teaching style has changed over the years to become more of a structured, methodical instructor. Leaving Guru Dan's school initially I taught the way I was taught. Like many students, we emulate our instructors. And when I would teach, someone would say, well, what are you teaching? Well, what do you want? I can teach you Kali, I can do boxing, I can do kickboxing, I can do Jin Fang kickboxing, a little bit of Silat. Oh, by the way, there's also Wing Chun in there. That doesn't do well for business, and it doesn't do well for structure. So the way we learn from Guru Dan, the majority of my learning came from him originally before I branched out to train with Angel Kabbalists, which I did for a long time. But my foundation came from Guru Dan. And I just realized that one of the things that people don't consider is that Guru Dan trained with Bruce Lee, right? And that's where his connection and how he evolved a lot of what he taught. But the majority of the students that Bruce Lee trained were not beginners unless they were celebrities.
Right.
When Guru Dan went to him, he already had a black belt in Kempo. And so when I went to start with Guru Dan, I was already a world champion. I had 2 titles when I walked through his door. And the point I'm making is that we had a background. The majority of people I met at Guru Dan School also came from other systems where they already had that foundation. So it was easier for us to grasp the way he taught because we would get pieces of a puzzle. And it took me a couple of years to go, oh, I see, the progression. We talked about progression constantly, but the progression honestly wasn't there. How could it be there if you're working on Savat for a couple months and then you're doing Silat? And then there was no connection. In my humble opinion, it wasn't there. You have to be able to take that and put it together and see, okay, I see where he's going with this. And Guru Dan loved learning. So whatever it was that he was interested in learning, that's what we were learning. So when I started realizing that it's not effective for me to teach beginners, because I was attracting beginners, not seasoned martial artists at the time, I had to come up with a system. Nothing original. I don't claim it was original, but you take your principles and you start developing a structure of how can I teach this efficiently and effectively and not take 10 years to get somebody to a proficient level. So I, over the years, really studied and actually became a person at the college where I wrote a lot of curriculum, and that became my expertise as a department chair and, in different departments, basically in counseling, but also in the physical education and health department. I would rewrite all the courses and update them, and I really learned how to structure curriculum. And so I became a lot more structured. And I feel that in a couple of years, you should be able to bring somebody to a pretty advanced level where they can survive in the world. You shouldn't have to take. I understand that if you're dedicated to an art, it's a lifetime journey. But in terms of being proficient enough to be able to walk into another school or something and not completely feel out of place, that shouldn't take 10 years.
Right.
And
I agree.
It's very structured today in how I teach.
Is it mostly seminars? Are you traveling around and teaching quite a bit?
I am, and I also went back and I teach at the college. Tomorrow is my last for the semester, my jiu-jitsu class. Next semester, I'll teach Eskrima. I developed all these courses for the community college where I live, which are all transferable to the UCs and the Cal States, and I'm basically. I developed my own job for many years. For 8 years, I left counseling and I developed a boxing class, a kickboxing, jiu-jitsu class, a Eskrima class, Tai Chi, which I didn't teach. I don't claim to be a Tai Chi instructor, but I brought a Tai Chi instructor in. But I developed, health and self-defense. I developed all these courses and developed the curriculum for him and taught him for years. And now that I'm technically retired, I can come back and teach, class here and 1 or 2 classes a semester. So I'm still doing that. And I had a school for many years with COVID. We finally closed and did not reopen. Decided at this point in my life that I just got busy once, we started coming back and doing other things. So.
That's cool though. I mean, it's cool that you were able to do that for that long. And obviously with your background, you're probably the perfect person for that job. So.
Well, I have one of my masters is in education, and you learn how to do, one of the things that I'm proud of in terms of my accomplishments is that when I had my school, and I'm still in contact with them, we do still train. The majority of my black belts came to me through the college, and I have stayed on them. So they've not all of them, but the majority of them have gone on to get their bachelor's degrees. And master's degree. One of them is working on his PhD. So I've been there for them in two different realms. One is, the martial arts, but also education, because I've always believed education is very important. And, you need that to fall back on it. Even though when I was young, I got my bachelor's degree. I have a bachelor's in pre-law from UCSB, and my master's is in counseling, education, emphasis in counseling and guidance. I kind of went through it just to keep my family off my back, because my focus was martial arts. But as long as I stayed in school, they didn't really bother me. And I'm glad I did, because eventually that became, my sustenance, my existence, because you couldn't make money off of, as a fighter.
Right.
So I had that to fall back on, where a lot of fighters don't.
Okay. So I got to ask, when you were fighting, were you fond of the nickname The Goddess? Is that one that someone else gave you? And did you?
You're probably too young to remember the Herald Examiner. There's LA Times and there was a Herald Examiner. Okay. And I fought that second fight where I fought Ginger Kaufman, who was known as a drummer girl. The headline said, "Goddess plays taps on drummer girl."
Okay.
And the Herald Examiner gave me that name, and it took me quite a while to get rid of it. I didn't want a ring name, and especially something that, it's nice to be considered a goddess, but for me, I always wanted, I wanted to be viewed as a professional athlete. So right. I resented the ring names, the cutesy thing, even though I knew that. I was the first boxer to step in a ring wearing a skirt. I would design my skirts because I knew it's, you need to catch attention. It needs to be entertaining. Mm-hmm. I wasn't going to wear ugly men's boxer trunks that were way too big, and they didn't make anything for women. So I would make even the boxer shorts I wore, I would make them myself. And
that's cool.
Design my own little uniforms.
So did you end up selling those to other women too then, or just for yourself?
No, I just made them for me. No.
That's kind of cool. So back then, did you guys have walk-in music? Did you have like a song that played as you were walking into the ring?
We did. We would.
What was yours?
One of them was "She's a Maniac."
Really?
Flashdance, "She's a Maniac," but I can't recall. Was it whatever was of it? I didn't have like a theme song.
You didn't? Okay.
But that was one
that
funny. I would use. Yes.
So what would you pick now? Now, this is 30 years later, that much more music you've heard. What would you pick now?
Gosh, I can't answer that right now.
I
don't know. It would be definitely something tribal.
Okay. That's cool. So what are your thoughts then on, being one of the pioneers of women combat sports? What are your thoughts on like MMA and the UFC? Is that something you're a fan of?
Well, it's interesting because I was living in West Virginia in 1992. I moved to West Virginia, and I got a call there from Jorge and Gracie, because I knew him from, when they had their school in Torrance. Yep. And he was telling me about this concept he had and how he, they were putting an octagon together, basically asking if I had any fighters. And I'm like, gosh, I'm married to hillbilly. No, I'm living out here in West Virginia. I married Ernie Boggs, who was really involved in sport jiu-jitsu at the time, and moved to West Virginia. And I said, I'm kind of out of it. But I was invited to be a judge at the UFC, and it was so brutal because it was basically in its first stages. And, I went a few times, and I just, at that time, now we had a school in West Virginia. I just felt like what was going on at that point in time was not something I wanted to advocate, because we had a lot of kids and a lot of young people. And I just felt like, what was it proving then? It was proving that you're the best today, but you might get your ass kicked tomorrow, but you're the best today, right. Not to be disrespectful, but that's really the way it was. And I couldn't see parents saying, yeah, that's what I want my kid to do. Well, how wrong I am, because today everybody's doing, when I was in Thailand, they would say in Thailand, if you kick a dog will kick you back. And today in the street, everybody knows what a jujikatami is. If you say, it's an arm bar, they know what it is. And they've never taken a martial arts class. So it's become like a household name, right? UFC. Moving forward, I'm happy that the women that have made it in are doing so well and they're getting paid real money. From my understanding, it's not all of them, of course. There's a lot of them that are still struggle, just like I did back in the day. The conditions are much better and they're treated a lot more fairly. And so I'm glad. I mean, I have 2 daughters and one of them wanted to be a fighter. And I was like, no way over my dead body would I allow you to do that. I shut that down very quickly because if I knew then what I know now, I probably wouldn't have been a fighter. I'm thinking of the physiological damage that one can sustain. I feel I was fortunate enough not to because I was just so aggressive and I would overpower my opponents, and I would take more punishment in the gym working with the guys than I would have during my fights. But I just feel that the women are going to want to do it. So let them fight and protect them. And it's like, I'm happy for them. And last year I was finally inducted. It was just 2 women out of all the men, but I was inducted into the National Boxing Hall of Fame again, along with Bridget Riley, known as Baby Doll Riley.
Yep.
And I've never really met her. So that was really cool. And the biggest highlight for me was that I was inducted right alongside of Roberto Duran, somebody I really idolized as a fighter. Yeah. I'm looking on my desk at a picture of me sitting next to him and I was laughing because he was there also. And, it was very cool, but I think that times have really evolved and the skill level is tremendous today because women are training more on an equal plane with the men, where when I was coming up, I was again lucky because I had access to some of the top male fighters in the world. I mean, one of my sparring partners was Hector Camacho.
Wow.
And in fact, my last thing I ever did was, after I retired from boxing, he invited me to Miami and I did a 3-round boxing exhibition with him.
That's cool.
And that was the last thing I ever did in terms of fighting. So I'm happy to see where they're at today. And I just, hope women continue to be, treated fairly.
Yeah, definitely. I know when I used to judge MMA, our women's fight were usually the best fights of the night. They were the most active, the most aggressive, the best technique. I mean, nine out of 10 times the women's fight was the fight of the night when I used to judge MMA. And I'm glad it's, like you said, they're finally getting what they deserve.
I'm happy to see that too. I wish I would have been born, 4 decades later.
Yeah.
This is my 50th year in since I started martial arts.
Wow.
This year.
This June is my 40th. So.
Well, I always laugh and I say started when I was 3.
There you go. Well, you mentioned Bridget. I've actually been chatting with Bridget Riley and hopefully going to be interviewing her soon on the show too. So.
She's done really well. I'm very proud of her. She's done well for herself.
Now, you mentioned 2 daughters. Now, did you get them involved and did they have a choice, or was it something, all right, I'm your mom, you're learning martial arts, or did they have a choice?
No, they growing up because, for the first years I was with their dad, the oldest one used to do all sorts of demonstrations with their dad, in jiu-jitsu, and she's a 2nd-degree black belt in jiu-jitsu. But they came to a point they would look at me and say, we don't want to be like you and daddy. And I told them, you don't have, no one's saying you have to. I never forced them. I said, but you will learn to defend yourself. You don't have to make a career out of this. You don't have to. But so I never pushed them. And they're there. They assist me when I teach. And, my oldest one, Selena, she would run the kids program. And for the years that, I had a school, they're both very good. Not because they're my daughters, they're just good athletes. They're good boxers. They're good kickboxers. They're good with weapons. They're well-rounded.
That's cool.
And that they've done that kind of on their own.
So over the years, what's the worst martial arts related injury you've had?
It's interesting. It was my oldest and my newest. In 1974, I was working on my flying sidekicks in Huarangdo. And, my foot landed and my ankle rolled and I fractured the top of my foot.
Oh,
and like the idiot that you are when you're young,
mm-hmm.
Couple weeks into it, I had my little brother cut my cast off so I can go back to the dojo.
Of course.
We call it the dojo, dojan. And so a lifetime of never allowing that to heal properly has bothered me. So finally, that's the worst injury because a couple of years ago, I had to have my whole foot reconstructed. Oh. And I had like 11 screws and pins and brackets put in my foot. And, but that's the only injury that I could say was martial arts related.
Okay.
besides all the broken noses, but that just comes with the territory.
Yeah, definitely.
When you retire, you get straightened out and you just go on.
That's cool. I know it wasn't a martial arts related injury. I actually injured my knee playing kickball in high school, but I've been putting off knee surgery for 30 years. I still haven't had my knee rebuilt, and I've been basically dealing with it for 30 years. So
you understand what I'm saying.
Definitely.
As martial artists, I think we develop a high tolerance for pain, and we just go, God, it's such an inconvenience to get it done. And so you just don't.
Yep. I've had a few times sparring where my instructors come over. He's like, you should be unconscious taking that kick to the head like that. I'm like, it didn't hurt. I'm like, I'm okay.
I'm okay.
So yeah, luckily strong head and high tolerance for pain. So
yes.
All right. So is there one philosophy over all your martial arts career that you come up with or that you've learned that is at the top of your list?
There is, I guess, one. And again, I will say it's not an original thought. Mm-hmm. It's what I've learned. And, you take from your instructors and what impresses you and imprints the most. And one of them is that, as a teacher, because that's mostly, I will always be a student, but as an instructor, I really believe we should be a pointer of the way and allow students to evolve and be a guide, not where they're carbon copies of you, like in many systems. And I mean, no disrespect, but whereas students just completely emulate their instructors and don't have their own identity. I think it's very important to help students evolve into the best person that they can, martial artists that they can be. And along with that, the training should be principle based always and not so structured that nothing can change, even though one person might be physically different from another, if that makes sense.
Oh, makes perfect sense. All right, I got a few fun questions to wrap it up. Now, this one, you've trained with a lot of people and you know a lot of people. Who are like 3, 4, 5 names you would put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts?
That I've trained with?
They don't have to be. I mean, like I've had people pick Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris. I've had people pick Gichin Funakoshi. I've had people only pick their instructors. It's your personal Mount Rushmore.
Well, Cliff Stewart is number one. Larry Hartzell would be another one. Bill Wallace, I have so much fun with when I train with Bill Wallace. There's 3 right off the top. Mm-hmm. Who else is out there that I have a good friend named Farvor Jacques, who I train with and has been just an incredible person in my life as a martial artist and a school owner.
I had another guest mention him too. That's at least the second time his name's come up.
Farvor, yep. Yes, He's very cool. And George Chung. I love George Chung.
George, yes.
He's wonderful and he's so funny. And I've known him since he was in high school. And he's to interact and, our lives kind of come together and go separate ways. And so those are some of my favorite people.
That's cool. Yeah, George, I've interviewed George and Bill both on the show. So, all right. So how about a favorite martial arts book other than your own?
Other than that's my favorite. Gosh,
I've had a few people try to pick their own, so I have to say that now.
Well, I like the Tao of Jeet Kune Do is one of my favorite books.
Nice.
I have several. I have Musashi's book that I always go back to. Mm-hmm. Miyamoto Musashi. Those are probably 2 of my favorites. The other favorite books I have are more contemporary books, like, the law. I really like to read about the law of self-defense because I don't think and so like right now I'm reading The Law of Self-Defense, An Indispensable Guide to the Armed Citizen by Andrew Branca and Masada Yug. That's an area that I think is really neglected in the world of martial arts, is teaching the civil and legal. And that's an area that I've gotten really heavily into and had a lot of training under Masada Yub with that.
Okay. Now, this one you may not have an answer for. Some guests do, some guests don't. But do you have a favorite martial arts video game? Did you ever get into video games at all?
No, okay. You're right. I don't have an answer.
That's okay. No problem. How about a favorite martial arts TV show?
No.
Okay.
I'm honest with you, I don't watch TV unless if it's a Netflix series. I just finished watching Blacklist. I like
great show
with a lot of action, just anything with action.
Have you watched Warrior yet? That just came out on Netflix in February.
That's on my list.
Okay.
But here's what I do. When I watch a series, then I put myself on timeout and I say, you cannot watch TV because I'm a binge watcher.
Yep.
Once I get excited about like Blacklist, I think, had 10 seasons.
Yeah.
And I'm embarrassed to tell you when I started and when I finished. But I think it was within 1 month. So when does she have time? So it's 3:00 in the morning. You're going to be hurting in the morning. You've got to get up at 6, stop it, turn it off, stop. And you've got these like battle going on back and forth. No, just there's 7 minutes left. And then 7 minutes ends. And then it speed dials right away. The next episode starts. So you're going, okay, I just gotta watch a little bit of it.
And 3 hours later, okay, I'm done with that season.
Your eyes are spinning.
Oh, yeah. I'm a binger too. Trust me. A lot of shows.
Yes.
What I'll do is I probably won't like this show, so I'm just gonna watch the first episode, and then 5 hours later, all right, I finished that series. What's next? Like, dang. Okay. How about a favorite martial arts movie?
Well, that's easy. Enter the Dragon.
Nice. Did you get to go see it in theaters last summer when it was the 50th anniversary?
No, I did not.
That was the first time I ever saw it on the big screen, so that was kind of cool for me.
Yeah, that's cool.
Doesn't have to be a martial arts movie. Any movie you've ever seen. Favorite movie fight scene?
Favorite movie fight scene. I'm thinking it's a woman.
Okay.
Gosh, I can't think of it right now.
Okay. Well, if you think of it, let me know. I'm just kind of curious, but yeah, I know you got to go. And seriously, I know we've been trying to schedule this for a while, and we both had kind of crazy schedules and stuff. And I so appreciate your time, and I want to thank you so much. I know the fans are going to love this, and I can't wait till the episode comes out.
I felt like I was kind of all over the place, but that's how conversations are, right?
That's right. Seriously, that's the best episodes. It has to sound like a conversation. It's more fun that way.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to reach out to me. It's all it's always fun. I figure for those of us that are older, I think, the younger people, it's good for them to know some of the history, because oftentimes I would speak to my students and say, have you researched, do you know who Bill Wallace is, or I'm like, how could you not know who these people are? And I try to, instead of shaming them, say it's important for you to learn about the history of the martial arts, because that's what has really shaped, where we're at today.
Exactly. And, that's kind of why I'm doing this. So, but hey, I will let you go so you can get on your next meeting, but I appreciate your time, and I will be in touch when the episode's out.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.